Today I'm going to talk about the re-recording of the album Schizophrenia by Cavalera Conspiracy. Or is it just Cavalera? I'm not sure at this point, but that's not important. This is a different kind of review because it's both a classic album review and a new album review in one. But the purpose of this video is to ask the question, was it worth re-recording? Or should they have just left it alone? So first, some background on the original album. The original album was released by the band Sepultura back in 1987. The band was still young at the time. It was their second full-length, which followed Morbid Visions from 1985 and the EP Bestial Devastation from that same year, which, by the way, were re-recorded last year. I did a full video on that album, and I'll link it to the end screen. While Morbid Visions had more of a raw black metal and early death metal sound, Schizophrenia saw the band moving towards more of a thrash metal sound with elements of death metal. The original Schizophrenia album was created by Max and Igor Cavalera on vocals and guitar and drums respectively, and this was the first album with Andreas Kisser on lead guitar and bass. The problem was, back then they were still a very new band. They were young. They didn't have access to the recording equipment that they have today. So the original album has a very raw production quality, much like how I explained in my previous video for Morbid Visions. But at this point in time, back in 1987, the band started to get more attention. They were signed to a Brazilian record company called Cogumelo, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and later signed to Roadrunner. Now it's 37 years later, they decided to get together again to re-record the new album. This album has Max and Igor, as well as Igor Andreas Cavalera, who is Max's son, and he plays bass, and Travis Stone on guitar, and he is from the band Pig Destroyer. The album has 10 songs. There are 2 short instrumentals, in addition to a longer 7.5-minute thrash instrumental. I'll talk more about that later. The original album had 9 songs, and the 1990 reissue had Troops of Doom as a 10th track, but they had already re-recorded that song last year, so they added a new song called Nightmares of Delirium. One thing I noticed was that the lyrical content changed in this album. The previous album had a darker, occult sound, which is why some people considered it early black metal. But on this one, the lyrics were more personal. There were more human topics. They're talking about war, a song about death, talking about mental illness, agony, despair. The tone was still very dark, but it was from a human perspective. So with that being said, let's talk about the music. The album starts off with a short intro track that sounds like a horror movie, and apparently they say the word schizophrenia backwards at the end of the song. Then the next 3 songs are just normal songs with the vocals and all that. So these 3 songs are From the Past Comes a Storm, To the Wall, and Escape the Void. One of the things that you will notice is that Max's vocals sounded different on this release. On the original, the vocals sounded very raw, as if it was just his voice with no effects used. But on this new album, Max's vocals sound like they have some effects used on them. One way to describe them is like he's very far away, or there's an echo sound on his vocals. I think a good word to use would be cavernous. Or like he's singing in a cave or doing vocals in a cave. His vocals are still very hard and aggressive. This type of vocal mixing might not work with other musical genres, but for this type of music, it sounds very good. Besides, it helps bring out the other instruments. And as for the other instruments, the guitars sound very heavy and crunchy. On the song From the Past Comes a Storm, this has Max and Travis playing a very heavy thrash metal style with some death metal mixed in. The next track, To the Wall, had more of a thrash and death sound, and Escape the Void was probably my favorite of those 3. As the guitars had a very thrash metal and death metal sound, but they also had some isolated guitar riffs mixed in. Now, let's talk about the bass guitar. Igor Amadeus has a really great sound. On the original album, the bass gets buried in the mix, but on this new album, you can hear the bass more in the forefront. If I have anything negative to say about it, is that you don't really hear any like isolated bass parts or that type of thing, but that's also due to the nature of the song, so that's really not anyone's fault. Also on the original album, the bass was credited to Paolo Jr., but it was Andreas Kisser who played on the original. As for Igor's drums, his playing sounds much better than he did 37 years ago. Also, the sound is much better. You can hear the bass and the snare drums, and you can hear that on this new version. Now we get to the middle of the album, and it's an instrumental called Inquisition Symphony. It's over 7 minutes, and the song starts with clean guitars and moves on to heavier sounds. The guitars sound very good on this track. Max and Travis play various styles in order to keep things interesting. They play some heavy thrash metal, then they have these galloping riffs, and at one part they play these like haunting tones in the middle of the song. Then there's one part where there's like the short interlude. They play this short Spanish guitar section and followed by more gallops. As for the bass and the drums, they're definitely on point in this track. On the one hand, I thought it was a great instrumental, but on the other hand, I didn't think I heard much of a difference between the original and this one. I think that was the only song this applied to, but I don't know, that might just be me. Following this instrumental were 2 more songs called Screams Behind the Shadows and Septic Schizo. These were some heavy thrash metal songs. I would say Screams Behind the Shadows had more variety in the playing and sound, and Septic Schizo was more straightforward. On the song Screams Behind the Shadows, Max and Travis played some slower guitar rhythms using some sustained power chords and some faster tremolo picking that gave it more of like a death metal edge. They also played with some of that like thrashy chugging and galloping, and there's even one part of the song where they play like this like little neoclassical part. The song also has some varying tempo changes, and you can hear that in Igor's drumming. As for the song Septic Schizo, more of an aggressive thrash metal song, more of that like palm muting in the guitars, and some more like that straightforward heavy thrash metal playing. There was another short instrumental called The Abyss. It was a soft acoustic and atmospheric instrumental. I read one comment saying that Andreas Kisser had a better version, but I also read a bunch of comments of people saying that without Andreas, there's no Schizophrenia album. So I think there are some people who just did not like the idea of this re-recording like at all. But after that was the last of the re-recorded songs, which was R.I.P. Rest in Pain, another aggressive thrash metal song. The song features some thrash and death metal elements, some chugging and different changes in the rhythm. There was even a weird waltz part at the end of the song. Then the album ends with a new song called Nightmares of Delirium. I like the song a lot. I thought it sounded like it fit on the album. I'm not sure if it's an old song that was never recorded or one they had written like just for this album. If you know, let us know in the comments. But it sounded like it fit well on the album. Another awesome thrash metal song with a thick bass sound and some fast-paced drumming. So I thought it was a solid album. My score is 9 out of 10. I don't think it has any weak songs. I wouldn't mind if Max and Igor continue to re-record some more albums. But I'm not sure if they should touch Arise or Beneath the Remains. Those are very good how they are, but we'll see what they decide to do. Check out my video from last year talking about Morbid Visions and Bestial Devastations. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.